Hey everybody, welcome to the Throwback Thursday. Today it's going to be some Rogue Trader as picked by the patrons. That's going to be the first 40k themed series that we redo here on Throwback Thursdays GMG as we go through some past episodes of A Bad Day at Hell's Reach, which was the retrospective, going all the way up until 2nd edition Warhammer 40,000. So strap in, take yourself back to 1987 and enjoy some Rogue Trader Warhammer 40,000.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Throwback Thursday GMG reviews. I have not done one of these in some time, mostly because it's very hard to record and play games of old-fashioned miniature games without a partner, without something to do it with. And the pandemic obviously slowed that down quite a bit, but you're in luck. My buddy Christian and I have been painting Rogue Trader miniatures, and today we're playing through a classic playthrough of Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. So we figured we would do a book review to kind of give an overview of the rules and stuff too. Now this actually right here is my OG copy. This was the copy that I bought at I think I bought it used at a comic book store called The Book Between, which was an old reference to when you were like a kid and you'd be in math class or something with a textbook and you would put the comic book in between the pages of the book you were supposed to be reading so you could read comic books in class. Something that I guess has just been replaced by smartphones today. And they would off and on have Games Workshop products, and I think this was something that either was ordered and someone didn't pick it up or didn't like it and it was just there, and I grabbed it and became obsessed with it. And this is the one that started it all. It's actually a follow-up to an article written in the, I think it's 3rd edition, maybe 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle compendium called Warhammer Science Fiction. It's also using ideas from a bunch of various articles that Rick Priestley had written for science fiction games. Specifically, there's one called Laser Burn that he really enjoyed. And amalgamates it. So what we have here as that follow-up to Warhammer Science Fiction is kind of that idea where he was tasked with writing a game that would be able to include the current Games Workshop miniature line, as well as some of its subsidiaries, like things like Doctor Who and Judge Dredd. They had the licenses for and were making Citadel miniatures for. Well, Games Workshop wasn't. Citadel Miniatures was. And that's why this is a Citadel Miniatures published by Games Workshop production, has both of the old logos on it. So it's interesting because it's not really designed as a mass combat game. Obviously it can be played as a mass combat game, but this is from a time where, and if you go back in the Throwback Thursday reviews and check out my 1st edition Warhammer review, you can see that these tabletop games are heavily influenced by role-playing games. And so there is a point value rubric in here, but there aren't army lists, there isn't really squad composition. The suggestions are more based on what was available in the boxes at the time. And there's even a article in here stating that at this time, Games Workshop does not produce vehicle miniatures, but we would like to in the future, going forward, as we improve our technology to do so. But there are a variety of appropriate science fiction model kits that you can use. But then goes on to actually include a picture of, and sorry, but they did produce Dreadnoughts, which is funny. They did produce this Dreadnought. There is a picture of a Mark I Land Raider in here, although it is very much a prototype, and the production kit actually looks quite different in the end. But there's no rhinos in here, I don't think. Yeah, and for the most part, you're just looking at pictures of actual Citadel miniatures. So I'm gonna go through it. Here it is, yeah, the Land Raider. An exploded view. So you can see here the Land Raider. And I believe this is a scratch build. Does it say? No, it's just an explosion of it. I don't know if it's actually accredited, but you can see that there's like a lot of like edge detail and stuff right here that makes me think that it was scratch built out of something. And then like the las cannons are actually, they look like Zoids guns and they don't match the drawing. But on the table here with the RTB-01. So this looks like a prototype mock-up. Maybe Tony Cottrell did it because he was famous for scratch building tanks back then. And in fact, the instructions for scratch building your own Baneblade and White Dwarf are his design. And of course, he is, of course, the tank master now of Forge World, doing vehicle kits and stuff. But yeah, this is very much a game that is designed to be played sort of with a handful of cool miniatures and tell a story. there's a ton of time spent on mission generation and storytelling and stuff, and you do kind of design your own model. So some interesting things in here, just to jump in the liner notes. 1987 is the publishing date, so I was 7 years old. The cover painting by John Sibbick, of course, is, you know, inspirational. And you can see my dog-eared copy has been much loved and much thumbed. Now, this softcover version was sort of the commercially available one. There was a hardcover version. This is one of several I have, but this one's the most broken. So I'm actually using it because it's the most broken. I have some good ones I'm going to kind of save. That was available at Games Day. And so I think the imprint on it's the same. Actually, it doesn't have the bottom liner note. And you can see here I have a bunch of my White Dwarf articles cut out and shoved in here. But this was available as a Games Day release, I believe, in a limited amount. And I have a couple copies of this too, including a nice one. But is effectively the same book. So we have the original Games Day sort of launch copies. We have this softcover commercially available one, which actually was a lot more hard wearing, believe it or not. I wonder if the back plate will tell me a bit more. It looks like it's... Yeah, so this is the 87 one, and this one is a reprint in 90, because this was the big commercially available one. That's why this copy is slightly different, is this would be a later printing. And then this, which is what I'll actually review because it's the most durable, is the currently available at events from the Forge World table repro of the original rulebook. And what's funny is if you look at it, how much thicker it is, they've scanned the book and like this original book, and then blown it up to make it a lot more durable. So the binding is way more durable. It's actually stitched instead of glue. And this was printed in, oh, they put the original 87 thing on here. That's funny. And then this one's manufactured in China because obviously it's been reprinted later on. So a really faithful reproduction. And it kicks off with this beautiful black and white on the inside here. Who drew that? First printing, so yeah, first print imprint 87. Second imprint 1990, this imprint 2016. So you can see I have a first printing, a second printing, and then this 2016 printing of it too. So let's jump in. I'm going to spend a bit of time on the rules, a bit of time on the background, and then a bit of time on sort of like the evolution, the in-between stuff. I have some more books here that kind of talk about how Rogue Trader jumped through. So it's divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections, and an introductory scenario called the Battle of the Farm. So combat, these are basically the rules of the game. Equipment, stuff that you can carry and take and how you put it on people. Some background, the Age of the Imperium, and actually the stat lines for everything are also in there. And then the Advanced Gamer. This is for the Advanced Gamer. This part right here is very experienced and honorable. Look at this gentleman, look at how fancy he is. And then the summary at the end here is the play sheet, radius templates, your GM's handout, and actually all the handouts for the Battle of the Farm are here in the back in black and white, including paper counters for playing the game. So what's interesting about this is it effectively is a 2-player starter set in a book. And they didn't want you to be stopped by not having miniatures. So they gave you, where is it, cardboard cutouts and counters for all your Marines. So there's Captain Cantor, Pedro Cantor, Thrug Bullneck, the orc leader, and then Hruck, his little champion, some squad leaders. So you get the stuff you need to actually play in here as well. And the sections themselves will basically be in a very familiar format, which kind of became the norm, but include a few things that you probably wouldn't recognize in 40K today. So there is, if you want a really detailed breakdown of the rules, there's actually a podcast called Rules Explained that bumped up, because I actually went to see, like, has anyone done this before? And there's been a lot of like flip throughs of this book, so I'm just giving my own take. You can probably Google one that's maybe more entertaining or, or more knowledgeable than mine. But that Rules Explained, if you want to deep dive on the rules themselves, it's a contemporary gamer interviewing a person that played this in the late 80s and early 90s, who's more of like a classic wargamer from that period, explaining the rules. And it's funny because they have some very strong opinions too, like the game would have just been better if you'd played D10s and rolled under your stat, and like a bunch of commentary that only someone who'd played the game extensively could have. It's really entertaining and wonderful, and I highly recommend it. So if I can find I think they have a website. I listened to it recently just as I was doing my research. So I'll link it in the video description below if I can, but it was really entertaining, really charming, and a lot of fun to listen to if you want a more deep dive on this, kind of section by section. So yeah, so what do you need to play? Scales, they give a very like detailed scale of like how tall things are supposed to be. Game equipment, you need to measure things, and dice. Now, it doesn't use at this point like a bespoke dice set. It uses this, your Crown Royal bag full of dice. And if you don't have a Crown Royal bag full of dice, then we are probably not of the same generation. But you're gonna use like a seriously standard amount of like D&D dice. Like I said, this is based on RPGs, so having access to all those dice types, they decided to use them in a lot of variety of cases, but mostly the humble D6 is what you're going to be able to mean. The battlefield, and you'll see I did my best in the game today to give kind of like a overview of things that would have been in this picture. So how to make things out of styrofoam. My favorite thing though, number 4 right here, lichen. Using hobby and like model train lichen as barricades. Cork walls. Broken cork for hills and stuff like that, aquarium plants, and just number 2, just rocks. Just go get some rocks from the garden and use them as scenery. And then number 10 here, buildings, things that you would actually make yourself. Now, interestingly enough, these buildings, I used to call the tennis ball buildings because they're made by making negative molds in sand and just pouring plaster of Paris into them. They're a wonderful homemade building set. And you would take, the first half is you take a bucket full of wet sand, you push down a tennis ball. The other domes there are use a ping pong ball to make them inside. And the hard edges would be things like a piece of packing material, anything square that you'd push in to make the negative. And then you would just pour plaster of Paris in there and let it dry. And then paint it afterwards. So I love these, and they're one of the hobby things that are in here. All right, troop characteristics. Except for the 4 at the end, these are pretty much what we have today. Of course, they're expressed differently. They're expressed as a value as opposed to what you need to roll to hit. That's the big change in 8th and 9th edition Warhammer. But you got your movement in inches, weapon skill, blood skill, strength, toughness, wounds, intelligence, attacks, and leadership. But then you also have intelligence, cool, and willpower. So much like in Warhammer Fantasy's earlier editions, these split up stats were used for different things. Your intelligence, for instance, would be used for solving problems on the battlefield. If the GM, which would be in this case, the person adjudicating your game, because you would have a third person telling you how to play, told you how. You're cool for like panicking and stuff like that. Certain tests would require you to use your cool instead of your leadership. Your leadership is typically what you pass on to the troops around you. Your cool would be what you personally would need to take a test on. And then your willpower, typically used for resisting and using psychic attacks. We got some beautiful miniatures here, all metal. Early space adventurers, early Imperial Space Marines. Color section, and then of course the RTB01 box. Now a lot of this is actually from the lines that kind of led up to this, which were the sort of science fiction Warhammer stuff, like the Slan. And then of course we have Orcs, Eldar, and while the profiles are pretty similar, everyone's a lot more individualistic, you might notice. There's a lot less being done to try and make everything kind of look the same. Old Diaper Dread, Medic, love the Imperial Battle Droid. Organize your troops, 2-inch coherency, pretty much the same as normal. And okay, so here's where we're going to start to kind of like give you an overview of the game, the turn sequence. So some pretty common things here from 35 years ago, 87 till now. Movement phase, you move your troops. What's interesting though is in the movement phase, unlike in later versions, there's no running. You can charge, which means move double your distance to get into contact if you can, to try and fight into melee, but there's no actual moving. So no actual running, that comes later in the reserve step. Then you shoot your guns. Now, all shooting was done model by model to other models in line of sight. It would change later on in the editions, but basically you pick a model you can see, and the biggest change there is you can only see a front 90-degree arc. So where your model was facing and pointing its gun was super important. Hand-to-hand combat, fighting in melee, also with some fairly different rules. And then reserves, which was how you ran. If you didn't do anything else during the turn, fight, charge, or be in cover to hide, you could make a second normal movement to bring yourself up. So your running kind of happened afterwards. And I actually really like that format where you would move, shoot, fight, and then make a reserve move if you didn't do anything else, because you had to commit to it during the turn. You didn't commit to it early on, but you could kind of see a little bit more what happened during the turn. You'll see during our game how that can be really interesting. Then use your psychic points using psi powers, and then rally if you're running away. Difficult and very difficult ground is pretty much as you'd expect, half movement and quarter movement. And then you're facing. So here's some examples of different base styles, and they didn't really care what kind of base you were on, which is interesting. The idea was use the miniatures you have, so hex bases are here, square bases, round bases. Defining line of sight, you can hide, the idea being that your miniatures can actually bend down and like lean down and stuff. And a lot of time is spent diagram-wise on how to shoot through woods. And there are tons of modifiers. And then we get into sort of our weapons and stuff and how it's expressed. They're expressed fairly differently with ranges. So you'd have a short and a long range and then a maximum range, and things can be more or less effective. And it did give a little bit more variety in weapons, not the same all the time. And you only typically shot once. There wasn't a lot of stats for your guns. You might have a rule called following fire where you keep shooting. That's kind of like having an assault or a burst value now, or a rapid fire. And then your movement could also be penalized depending on how heavy the weapon that you're carrying is. Now your score to hit's pretty much the same as in previous and lesser editions. It's your chance out of 6 of hitting. So if you have a ballistic skill of 4, you have a 3 to 6 chance of hitting. You roll a 3, 4, 5, or 6 to hit. Lots of modifiers, shooting a large target, shooting a small target, firing from a moving surface, so if you're in like an open top vehicle, firing at a faster moving target, if they move more than 10 inches during the turn, you have to actually mark your units. If the fire is wounded, the target's behind soft cover, throwing an improvised weapon, or being behind hard cover. And models in the unit didn't all have to do the same thing. So if you were in a unit with other models, some could shoot, some could hold off shooting to make a reserve move, others could fight in close combat. Your unit coherency was important, but it didn't dictate that you all had to do the same thing. You had a choice model by model as to who did what. Modifiers based on range. And then damage, rolling to wound. This has stayed the same pretty much forever. And until 8th and 9th edition, this chart has been the same. If your strength and toughness are tied, it's a 50-50 chance of wounding. For every point better, it could get better, up to a maximum of 2+ and 6, but you could drop off. A strength 1 weapon cannot hurt anything more than quadruple its strength. So you'd go to toughness of 5, you just couldn't wound it anymore. So there's no such thing as an auto wound, but there is things that are actually impervious to certain guns. So like dreadnoughts, for instance, some of them are like toughness 8, 9, 10. You just can't wound them with certain guns, like at all. They're just impervious to it, which is an interesting way of like making a difference between like soft-shelled and armored vehicles and stuff. Deviation. So template weapons were interesting, and this game did use a lot of blast weapons. So everything from a 1/2 inch template, which would be 1 inch across, through to like a 4 inch template, which would be 8 inches across. The bigger your template size, the more likely it was to scatter, but then like you'd know where the initial point is, but then you would actually roll to hit all the models touched individually. So for instance, if I was firing a missile launcher with a 2 inch blast, I'd put the template where I want it, anywhere I want, line of sight, targeting a unit, and then I would roll a die. On a 3, 4, 5, or 6, it would scatter. Then it would scatter a D12, like a clock facing, and it would scatter a D6 in inches. So it would, final position would be dictated. So the idea was the bigger the blast is, the less accurate it kind of has to be, unless you're shooting a single target. And it'll deviate, and then you actually roll to hit afterwards individually against all the models touched by the template. You can never deviate more than half the total distance, so like grenades can't bounce back at you. Although you could somehow, if you threw a really big blast grenade, I guess, get like hit by the blast itself. And then following fire, instead of having more than one shot, you would roll to hit someone, and as long as you cause damage, even if you get saved afterwards by armor and stuff like that, you can keep shooting. So you can keep shooting infinitely as long as you keep rolling to hit and rolling to wound. And that meant like heavy weapons, like heavy bolters with falling fire that had targeters. So a Marine with a targeter hit on a 2+. So if you're in the open, it'd just be like 2+, 2+, 2+, 2+, like a guardsman being shot in the open by a heavy bolter. You would just keep firing at him or another target that was within 4 inches until it ran out of bullets, basically. And you just keep going, and unless they died or your guy finally rolled a 1, you just keep shooting and stuff. And then hand-to-hand combat, so entering hand-to-hand, you can charge, make a double move to get into combat, and if you do, you're fighting. Now, when you are charged, you can also run away, which means make a double move back, although that might sometimes not get you to combat, in which case you count as fleeing. And then you can also shoot when people are actually charging you. So the model being charged can stand and fire. This is permitted even though it isn't the model's turn. It's an exception to the normal turn sequence. You can't fire if you're carrying slow weapons. Some things can't do it. And you're -1 to hit when you stand and shoot. So taking cues from fantasy, meaning that you could actually like do damage on the way in all the time. Now, that, again, would change later on with the introduction of stuff like Overwatch. Fighting with multiple weapons. You got to fight with your full number of attacks with each weapon, but when you did so, you had to actually know what the offhand was for your character. So if you were right-handed, your right hand would be -1 to hit, then your left hand would be -2. But if you had 3 attacks, you'd make 6 attacks with either hand going back and forth. each weapon would do hits and damages based on its own profile. Now, the one thing that is slightly different is actually going to be the to-hit chart. You'll notice because there's so many to-hit modifiers, it's not a 4+ when you're tied. When you're tied, it's a 5+ to hit. But the charger would get +1 to that score. If you're frenzied, +2 to the score. If you're charging uphill, if the model's on a higher slope and you're coming downhill at somebody or you're above them, you get +1. Following up, if the model's pushed back its combat opponent in the previous turn. So basically, if you're following up, if you've driven them back already, you're seizing the advantage. You're considered to still be charging. And then -1 for defended obstacle, -1 for using more than one weapon, -1 again for using a wrong hand weapon, which is your offhand, and then -2 if you're using an improvised weapon, like you're unarmed and stuff like that. So typically, let's say I was a weapon skill 4 Marine fighting a weapon skill 3 Orc. I would be 1 better, so 4 against 3, I'd hit on a 4+. I'd be charging, I'd go down to hitting on a 3+. And that means that, you know, you've got the same kind of rolls to hit, but the math to get there is a little bit different. Mins to hit are always 2+, even with modifiers, and then you make your saving throw. Now, saving throws are pretty much as normal, but things might not have the save you think they do. So for instance, Flak Armor has a 6+ armor save. In later editions, it would have a 6+ then a 5+ against blasts. That's not there yet. Mesh Armor is a 5+ save. You don't even barely see Mesh Armor anymore. And then Carapace Armor is a 4, sorry, not even Carapace Armor. Powered Armor is a 4+ save. There isn't even Carapace Armor yet. And to get to a 3+ save, if a Space Marine wore Flak Armor under their Powered Armor, they would get to an actual 3+ armor save. That was again changed later on. And the stat line for the Marines also wasn't quite the same as it was. Then route tests, you'd make it immediately if you took, you lost a round of combat, took more wounds in combat than your opponent. If you took a third or more of your current numerical strength in shooting or psychic damage in a single turn. And at the GM's discretion, if your Games Master said that you should, you roll 2d6 under your leadership, otherwise you fall back and run twice immediately. And you can keep running off the table until you rally in the rally step. And the reserve step. So now the important thing that you need to do to make your second move, so to basically run after move, shoot, fight has happened, is you belong to a unit with no members within 4 inches of the enemy, so you can't make a dash basically if people are disrupting you. The model did not shoot in the shooting part of the turn, the model is not in behind cover, and the model is not hiding. And that makes a reserve move. So you can move 4 inches, but you can't charge or enter into hand-to-hand combat. And then psychology. So some common things here. Confusion, though, is a new one. Frenzy, fear, and hatred. Now, most of these are made on cool, and you could lose your brain to confusion if you failed. Now, if you're confused, you're -1 to hit with all shooting, -1 to hand-to-hand, can't use psychic powers, you move half, you can't split or change your unit composition, because you can actually do that, you can break up units, and you ignore all further psychology tests while confused. If you're frenzied, you're +2 to hit in melee, you must charge if you can, and must move double pace towards the enemy. The unit must always follow up in hand-to-hand, you ignore all route tests, and you can't be routed while frenzied, and you ignore all further psychology tests. And once in combat, you're main frenzied automatically, so long as at least one model is in base contact with the enemy. Fear, if you attempt to charge, you can't do so, and you halt if you fail a test. If you're charged by something that you fear, the unit's routed automatically. If attacked by weapons that you fear, you must make an immediate route test and honor the results. And then hatred, a unit that fails their cool test must abide to the following rules. The unit must move at full normal rate towards a hated enemy. They must charge the enemy. And so long as the unit's subject to a hatred reaction, it cannot be routed by hated enemies. So basically, if you get to fighting like somebody you hate, let's say the Marines hate the Orcs or the Squats hate the Orcs or whatever, you're going to keep running towards them and keep fighting. Got rules for mapping the interiors of buildings. And what's interesting here is that the game actually provides you with maps for the interiors of buildings if you want to write them out. And then the vehicle rules, man, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I will tell you these were some complicated rules that got more complicated with the introduction of the vehicle manual, which is a later expansion, and included everything from like turning templates, your maximum speed, your maximum acceleration and deceleration. And if you're an air vehicle, your max speed and minimum speed, because you could crash and stall it if you go too slow. Then your turning radius, your control points, your toughness, your damage, your save. I don't remember what EQ and wounds are. EQ and wounds are TRR, equipment, your equipment slots that you can carry, and then weapons, the number of weapons that you have on you. What was cool though was that you could actually design and build your own weapons, including dreadnoughts. Now, Dreadnoughts were a lot easier, and you'll see us feature a Dreadnought, because Dreadnoughts are basically just a regular fighting guy stat line with a saving throw, a technical level, weapons, and equipment points. And you would just build them yourself. Give them the weapons that you want. And then robots, because you can build robots too. Again, they're fairly simple because they have like a damage stat instead of a wound stat, and they get to build out the robots however you want to. Aircraft, turning, height levels. Oh my god, so much stuff in here. And again, these guys, they didn't even make miniatures for planes or vehicles at this point. How to have a personality. So basically you take your standard like stat type and you would add the following stats to it to make it a champion, a minor hero, or a major hero. And I love the art for some of these. Like dude whose hat lives on a crane. How to make up a random hero, generating characters for your campaigns, and some basic experience rules. Your psionic level, so your psi level, how many like powers you'd have. So if you're mastery level 1, you'd have 3 powers and a random number d6 if you want. And then you would generate your powers based on the different schools. So level 1s could have these 10, like and there's some names in here to recognize. Hammerhand, but also things like Cure Injury, Steel Mind, Teleport, Wind Blast, Telepathy, Telekinesis. Level 2s could be things like Aura of Protection, Jinx, Mental Bolt, Smash, Telekinesis, Teleport, Telepathy 2, like different levels. Level 3, Aura of Recalcitrance, Animate Weapon, Route, Telekinesis, Transfer Aura. Level 4, Aura of Invulnerability, Cure Wounds, Mental Blast, Stasis, Strength of Mind, Temporal Distort. So you would be able to use psychic abilities during the later psychic phase. And all of them had their own little pictures and their stat lines and stuff too, which is super cool. And then the rules for injuries, which is amazing. So, or sorry, for mutants as well. If you wanted to have mutants, you get a D100 table for what kind of mutant you had. I've got a bestial face and 1 eye. Then I've got great fangs and I'm very strong. And they would even have rules for your mutants based on how they were. And then some gorgeous pictures of all these mutants. Look at that stuff. I'm pretty sure most of those are studio members with mutations. And then point values. Okay, so now a whole section is given for basically a rubric for how to point guys out. And when Chris and I play our game today, we'll be playing without even considering point values, and then at the end we'll see what the point values were when we added them up. So the basic human stat lines are everything's built off of here, and it has a 5-point cost. So the idea is that if you have movement of 4, 3s across the board for weapon skill, bliss skill, strength, and toughness, a wound, an initiative of 3, 1 attack, and then your personal characteristics are all 7, you cost 5 points. Then for each point you adjust it by, you go up by even fractions of points. So for each of your personal characteristics to go up, it's a quarter of a point. So basically it's 1 point for all of them to go up by 1. Every attack is 4 points. Every initiative level is a quarter point. Every wound is 4 points you go up by. Your strength and toughness are a point each, and then your movement is a quarter point, your bliss skill is a quarter point, your weapon skill is a half point. That was always interesting to me. I thought the weapon skill and bliss skill should be reversed. You're using your ballistic skill way more often than your weapon skill. So once you worked out what your basic point value was for the model you're creating, then you could buy an equipment. And that would be everything from weapons like auto guns and shuriken catapults to close combat stuff like power gloves and power swords, and then heavy weapons and variable weapons like, hey, I'm gonna arm this guy with a defense laser for 250 points, grenades, mines, equipment, armor, bionics, or even put them in a dreadnought. So your armor, for instance, if you had you did have carapace armor, that's right. You could have plate armor, so like plate mail, powered armor for 6 points, or refractor field costs 1.5 points. It does pretty much what you think it does now. It's a 5+ invulnerable save. Bionics, they'd be 30 points, and it was where you would like have your bionics. Put a targeter into your bionic eyes for 10 points. And then what are your vehicle costs? It's 25 points to your core stat line to make them put into a dreadnought, and then the points for vehicles are worked off based on their own stat line too. Buying robots, buying psionics for your model, and then common points for common creatures. So a marine costs basic 8 points, a champion's 9, a minor hero is 69, a major hero is 124. Ogrins, squats, eldar, orcs, grecians, slan, jakaro, tyranids, zotes, and what it costs. And then even point values for the monsters. for Groxes, Gene Stealers, Lashworms, Dinosaurs, Giant Insects, Razor Wings, Rippery Fishes, and Sunworms. And the Battle of the Farm. Now, this battle was a lot of fun. Basically, it reenacts the events on Rin's World, when the orcs of Snaggerod, the arsonist, accidentally blow up the Fortress Monastery of the Crimson Fists, and the survivors are making their way through the wreckage. They hole up at a farm for the night, because, Marines need to sleep at this point. They're just psycho-indoctrinated humans. And they get attacked by an orc group who are basically looking for a treasure they buried there earlier. So there's a whole storyline to it. It's great. It showcases the RTB01 box and the metal orc box of its period, which is the Orc Raiders box. And I considered painting this up to showcase Rogue Trader, but it actually doesn't showcase the rules very well, because it uses like squads as opposed to using like random stuff. The rules for this are more of an RPG, and so the Bad Days at Hell's Reach that you'll see today is more of us playing like a quasi-RPG with a couple units as opposed to two like armies actually facing each other. I may do this at some point though. Tell me in the comments if you think I should do the Battle at the Farm, because we have the models to do it. It's just more of like, do I want to recreate that? And then equipment. So more rules for like your weapons after we've seen the point values for them, and some cool illustrations for everything from like hand bows through shuriken catapults, power swords and power weapons. And this guy's a rogue trader, hanging out with his bionic arm, power gloves, Weber's power swords, and then super heavy weapons like a distortion cannon, las cannons, and even the weapons that are mounted on starships. You can see here the classic heavy bolter, underslung, heavy Weber, heavy stubber. It's basically like a M60. And then the old rocket launcher with its kind of submarine profile. Very heavy weapons like a macro laser, or a macro cannon, sorry, although it's spelled Marco cannon here, which is clearly a typo. And then on to grenades and missiles with the cool Eldar Raiders with their B-Wings. Different grenade types, mines, and a cool weapon summary. And you can see here on the weapon summary, it's probably the best way to show it off. You had your short and long range, your bonuses to hit at those ranges, your strength, how much damage it did. So like a meltagun could do D6 damage, whereas a multi-melta did 4d4 damage. Save modifiers, and then these were, is it close combat? Is it heavy with a move reduction? Is it slow, so you can only fire it every other turn, and does it have following fire? And they just put an X in if that was the case, or the numerical value. So a heavy bolter, for instance, shoots 20 inches to 40, strength 5, d4 damage, and a -2 save. You lose an inch of movement when you're carrying one, and it's slow, so you only fire every other turn, and has following fire. I think the slow came off eventually, and then last but not least, the tech level. That was your required intelligence to operate. So you had to be at least intelligence 6 to operate that gun. Some things though, like, let's say a haywire grenade, you had to be intelligence 8 to use because it was so techy. More vehicle profile stuff for different typical crawlers. They give you examples of like bikes and stuff. Gorgeous art here. An original Tyranid. More Battle at the Farm photos. This Thopter, one of my favorite things. The Orgus Flyer. Land speeders, juggernaut vehicles, the city car, and that picture of the Land Raider. And while you can see there's tons of concept art for things like the new land speeder, they just didn't exist yet. It was just ideas of things they wanted to make. I love this exploded view of power armor and the different armor profiles. Flak, commonly type of body armor worn by civilians in dangerous manual jobs, has a technical level of 5. And then you have powered armor and carrot-based body armor. Carrot-based body armor is heavy weapon, so it reduces your movement by 1 inch. And sometimes you get a respirator with it, and has a 4+ armor save. Whereas powered armor, where is it? Stasis field. Powered armor, it's heavy, but you're free to move without penalty. You have a 4, 5, or 6, and does not count as heavy equipment and confers no movement penalty. It's sealed, giving it a saving throw of 3, 4, 5, and 6. Tech level of 6. Refractor field, 5 or 6 invulnerable save. Shields, increase your basic save by 1. Can't use pistols. Rules for robots, and lots of drawings of robots. I love this guy with the death from above. And then other equipment, like the porter rack for Inquisitors. When you need to torture somebody, but you don't want to carry a lot of stuff, this porter rack is for you. And then a power field generator, which was basically, I like this one. It had an inch radius for how big the bubble was, so what it worked outside of, and a toughness. And every time you took a point of damage, it would shrink an inch. And if it ever went to 0, it would blow out. You couldn't use it for the rest of the game. But then every turn, it would regrow back out to full. So it's kind of like the Enterprise, you know, like in Star Trek. Its shields would like take damage and like slowly retract and then go back to full. That's the idea with the power field. And most vehicles carried power fields, and they were toughness 10 to do damage to them, so it would protect them. Beautiful 2-page of art. The famous Age of the Imperium, Space Marines lined up. Picture of the galaxy, warp creatures, this is all the backgroundy stuff, Humanity the Imperium. Alright, it's sexy custodies, and they're sexy, I don't know, like, I think they're wearing pants, they're just not wearing shirts for, I don't know why. And the Emperor, having a bad day at work. Look at that. Beautiful, creepy, kind of biomechanical picture of the Golden Throne. And the Emperor plugged into it, staying alive. Stat lines for humans, right? A Custody stat line, move 4, weapon skill 5+, ballistic skill 5+, strength 4, toughness 4, 2 wounds, initiative 5, 2 attacks, 8s across the board. Our Custodians today, significantly tougher than that. But you also had Arbites, Adeptus Astronomica, Mechanicus, like their standard equipment. The Inquisition, just again, standard like human profile for a hero. How to make an Inquisitor. Charts for their weapons. So in the old days, you wouldn't actually know what you had, which made it very hard to buy miniatures because you'd have to randomly roll up what you had and then find a miniature that would, you know, like be armed that way. So let's say I wanted to take a, I don't know, a Psyker. I'd roll. I have a 25% chance of a pistol, of having 2 pistols, but I always get 1. Then a 75% chance of a weapon, and a 25% chance of additional weapon. And then 10% chance of D4 grenades, 25% chance of 1 type of armor, 25% chance of a field, and then chances of other equipment that I could potentially be carrying. So imagine you're me, and you're like 9 years old, and you're like, I'm gonna roll up my first army, and then you try and go looking for miniatures, and you're like, I can't find anything that is equipped this way. But then, of course, the other option was always just to make it yourself. Marines under the Emperor's Palace, doing members of the Adeptus Terra, wearing like powered armor to protect themselves, going about their daily routine of maintenance and servitude. The Navigators Guild, the Legions of Astartes. I like this guy. He is bad news. Shooting that poor orc through the head. There's the original Lehman Russ drawing, as he loses his lungs. And then, while there isn't really a history of the Imperium here, it's just young recruits are subjected to many hours of intensive training and indoctrination, leading them to be physically and mentally changed. Their bodies are toughened by biochem, and their resolve is hardened by psychosurgery. A special black carapace is merged with their natural flesh, forming a sort of identity tag, as well as a permanent protection. All this preparation is intended to turn them into a disciplined killer, or at least a controllable one. And then you live on, you know, an asteroid or on your base or whatever. And you'll see the profile has basically been unchanged for 35 years with the exception of toughness. They were originally toughness 3. They became toughness 4 when they basically decided to not have, you know, layered flak armor under their power armor, but that the black carapace itself improved the save of the power armor and also made them toughness 4 instead of toughness 3. They're tougher than normal humans. And then there's their chapter organization. At the top, the Emperor. Then their chapter leader, Imperial Commander, 10 companies, and then 10 squads of Space Marine Sergeant and 9 Marines. Different chapters, how to arm an ordinary Marine. So a 95% chance of carrying a bolt gun, but a 5% chance of carrying a las gun, and a 5% chance, sorry, a 2% chance, actually, sorry, it's not even a 5% chance. It's a 3% chance of a las gun and a 2% chance of an auto gun. Blind, crack, frag, or random grenades. Sergeants always had a bolt pistol and knife, but might also have a bolt gun or a pole pistol or a hand flamer. And then maybe a chainsword, maybe a power axe and power glove. I like it, there's a 5% chance of a power glove, and every Space Marine Sergeant in this edition is armed with one. Picture of the Space Wolves Fortress Monastery, the first ever picture of the Fang. Pretty cool, eh? It's got some sweet turrets with some sweet guns. Looks like the top of a Imperator Titan, actually. Different descriptions of them. The Imperial Army. Myron Jubalgun, Inquisitor Toulon Hess, my Inquisitor actually, from Stargrave, has been hunting this guy for a while. He's a bad dude. Hangs out with weird aliens. And then the beautiful color section of the original 12 sort of colorized chapters, along with a chaplain, a medic, and the field police, which is what I painted Brother Vermilion. You can see here we've got the Dark Angels, the Flesh Eaters, right? And then the Flesh Tearers with their yellow saw blade, how I did mine. Although I did them with the red legs and chest piece, basically, to match the current color scheme. Some Space Wolves, Ultramarines, and White Scars, pretty much unchanged as of today. Same with the Iron Hands. Silver Skulls, a successor, same with them. No Imperial Fists, though, just Crimson Fists. Blood Angels, Blood Drinkers, the Rainbow Warriors. Imperial Assassins, still existing even back then. Another picture of the Emperor. This Custodian's guarding him. I like that he's got like a blood feed. He's got a little drip bag. Super cool flat. This was done a lot, actually, these little dioramas back in the day, where they'd make like a flat sort of like scene. It's almost like a shadow box. So cool. Ultramarines, and this guy Kool-Aid Manning through the door, and this orc flamethrowing these poor 2 Imperial soldiers. Rules for abhumans, like halflings and beastmen, squats, the Eldar, the orcoid race, and the orcs. And so you can see the vast majority of this book is the Slan, put over to Tyranids and their Hive Fleets, Zotes, and Slavers, is the Monsters and Bad Guys. And there we have the original Gene Stealer from Imgarl. And they've actually done a bunch of, you can see it's still four-armed, with the exception of the head, and they did a bunch of Imgarl Gene Stealer heads that have like the Zoidberg face. It's pretty much unchanged. You got the Grinks. You can see I've got that Grinks picture that Paul Shorten sent me, which I'm still eminently grateful for. Look at how cool that is. Space Cats. Lashworms, Terra Squirrels, Jacaros, Rippy Fishes, the Catachan Face Eater that disguises itself as a face cloth. And here it is. This is where our game is going to be set, Logan's World. These are pictures of Logan's World, basically. It's basically a big, bad kind of desert planet with all kinds of dramatis personae, and every like level of like adhuman kind of like living together. The warp stones end around it every like 20 years, and the Imperium kind of briefly regains control. When the Eye of Terror blinks, ships fly between the Lost Worlds and the rest of the galaxy. So think of it like a Mos Eisley, basically, set in 40K. And Hell's Reach, which of course is on Armageddon now, was originally from Logan's World. Love these, the Water Merchant and Slavers, Miners at Work and at Rest, Orc Slavers, the Hoverbus Gangs, gotta watch out for those Hoverbus Gangs, and the Hive Brats. And then we have the Advanced Gamer. So going into campaigns, things like a plot generator. So first you would roll for the motive for your players, and then you would roll what the actual plot was. So for instance, if you're gonna raid and capture an important person or item, you'd roll on that table, and it could be everything from, I don't know, a crashed spacecraft basically, is on a barren waterless world, one human, one alien, and they each have something the other one needs, and you're fighting each other. Or capture and hold, a mighty river lies between a retreating army and its homeland. And oddball stuff, and then subplots for your characters. And so now we're into the color section where you talk about collecting and painting forces, and you can see there aren't any real hard and fast ways as to how to play the game. There's no like scenarios or like play this many points or get in and like, you know, build your army in this way force construction wise. It's just, here's some story hooks. Here's a rough idea of how to like collect miniatures and where the miniatures could be from and what their backgrounds and point values could be, and then go at it. And now here it is, collect and paint your forces. You can see here we've got Rick himself hanging out. I think that's Brian Ansell. I'm not sure who that is. It almost looks like John Gillard. And then everybody just throwing down at their you know, their basement basically. Examples of how to make terrain. So these are all yogurt containers or like sour cream containers turned upside down and then painted. How to prep your miniatures, building and painting, undercoating, using Citadel color. And then a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-step process for painting your first base Marines. I desperately tried to, you know, follow this when I was a kid and got mixed results. I realized almost immediately that the black spray paint would have been better than the white spray paint because it took so long to go over top of it. Shading charts. The junk you can save to make things out of. See, like we got packing material, cans. I saved everything as a kid. My parents even started doing it. The hoarding impulse. The author tries not to just store every and any interesting looking thing, but you might want to. different raw materials you might want to use to do it in detail. So you can see there was quite the hobby section even in here, because back then you had to do it all yourself. There was no like pre-built terrain. And then the big sort of like reveal, the ta-da at the end of it of having like a built and finished collection was, I guess, the payoff. So I spent some time teaching you how to do it. Beautiful studio overview. This is everybody as kind of like a a group shot, I guess. You've got Trish and Ellie Morrison there chained together. I know Richard Ellard's in here. Everybody's in here at some point. And they're all sort of like, there's the twins, the Perry twins. There's Rick. Very cool. More project ideas for how to make a control tower. The plastic dome, using a tennis ball. The residential block, using like a bin and a cut piece of pipe. And then the rule summary. So your hit charts, vehicle charts, turning, miscellaneous rules. Your author's note on language. And then more sort of background stuff on the universe. The timeline of the Rogue Trader universe. And then your play sheets. And that's it. Templates you can cut out and photocopy. And then the stuff to play the battle at the farm with the unit dispositions, paper counters, a roster sheet for filling with your roster so you can take advantage of it. And then some ads for the Imperial Space Marines and the Orc Raiders. So $9.95 for 30 Space Marines, or $9.95 for, I think it was 20 Orcs? 17 metal Orcs, yeah. 30 plastic Marines for $9.95, or 17 metal Orcs for $9.95. Miniature supplied, unpainted, unassembled. And then all the fantasy battle rules, so all the roleplay stuff, and then Warhammer Fantasy Battle itself. And then that same beautiful color plate at the back there of the Orcs fighting the Marines. I love this guy with his like shark mouth, basically. How cool is that? So there it is. Almost more of an RPG book than a war game of the time, or tabletop RPG almost. We have Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. Now you can click and watch Chris and I play our first game, A Bad Day at Hell's Reach Part 1, to go along with this review. And then in 2 weeks, I'm going to review this sucker right here, which is a very important book that added on to the Rogue Trader rulebook called the Battle Manual. Now there's also the Vehicle Manual, and what this did was this basically bridged the gap between Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader and Warhammer 40,000 Second Edition, which was more of a war game. What I'm not going to do is go through all these, the Companion, and the first book of the Astronomicon, because in between this book and the rulebook I just flipped through, there are a million White Dwarf articles, and Warhammer 40,000 was so crazy popular, almost unexpectedly so, that it was expanded massively through White Dwarf. And it became damn near impossible to keep up even with the core rule changes for like picking targets and shooting, hand-to-hand rules, rules for units, point values. You can see I even have White Dwarf articles still cut out and stuck in here. Like the rules for dreadnoughts, revising Rick Priestley and Brian Ansell, further ideas for using dreadnoughts, just revising the rules for dreadnoughts completely, just shoved in here. And these were compiled, like here's the rules for Terminators when Space Hulk came out, Chaplains and Commissars. It goes on, and they were even all designed to be punched and put in binders. The Judge Red role-playing game. What else is in here? Chaplains of the Imperium. It was kind of all summed up, although the army list and stat lines were still needing to be played out of this, in this right here, which is the Battle Manual, which changed the core rules of the game and then was sort of quickly followed by Second Edition Warhammer 40,000, which we'll do our own whole series on as we move through the editions of 40K. So this one right here is pretty important, and you'll see that to basically follow up Bad Day at Hell's Reach Part 2, which will be using the expanded rules for Rogue Trader, and not just the rules that come in the rulebook. So anyway, big thanks for watching. We'll see you for more TBT reviews. Till then, I'm Ash. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video. There are tons of other games already recorded for you to watch. Click over to my channel page if you haven't already, and have a look through the dozens of playlists full of videos. I guarantee you'll discover a game you haven't seen played before. I put out new videos 7 days a week, and every day is themed to a different genre as I continue to explore the wider world of gaming. Of course, none of that's possible without you, the viewer, so click a like and subscribe if you'd like to stay on top of what's happening here daily. My 2 kids and I are massively grateful to be able to have the flexibility of this job so I can always maximize my time with them. If you want to support me continuing to put out this content, it's only possible because of my amazing backers on Patreon who support the studio, equipment, and model cost, as well as being how I make the bulk of my living. You can also help out by buying a t-shirt through Spreadshirt, a measuring gauge or widget from Death Ray Designs, or buying one of my games and supplements like Last Days, Gamma Wolves, and Blaster. As a way of showing my appreciation, patrons get early access to new games and supplements that I write throughout the course of the year. Huge thanks for watching, it really does help out, and happy gaming.